The wind howled through the valley, dragging with it the scent of damp earth and wild sage. The farmhouse stood alone on the outskirts of a small, forgotten town, a weathered structure with peeling paint and creaking shutters that whispered secrets to the night. The land stretched far beyond the eye could see, a vast, lonely expanse framed by rolling hills and dense, shadowed woods. This was no place for the weak. This was a land that tested a person's will, where only the strong survived, and Olivia Carter knew that better than anyone. She stood on her porch, a rifle slung over one shoulder, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. The farm had been in her family for generations, but now it was just her and her son, Noah. She'd inherited the land after her parents passed, and though it was hard work, she refused to let it slip away. This farm was her home, her son's future. She'd fought too many battles in life to let anyone take it from her now. The past had hardened Olivia in ways most wouldn't understand. She wasn't just a single mother trying to make ends meet. She was a former Green Beret sniper, a soldier who had seen war up close, who had taken lives to protect others. But here, in this quiet town, she wasn't a warrior anymore. She was just a mother, a woman trying to build a safe, stable life for her child. Still, old instincts never truly faded, and lately, they had been stirring like a warning in her gut. It started with the small things, the way the town folk looked at her when she came into the general store, the sudden hush when she walked past a group of men at the gas station, the sense that she was being watched when she worked in the fields. Something was wrong. She could feel it even if she couldn't yet see it. Then came the threats, a single note tucked under her front door, its message simple but chilling. Sell the farm, or else. No signature, no explanation. Just a demand. Olivia didn't scare easily. She'd faced worse threats in the middle of enemy territory, where the wrong step could mean instant death. But this was different. This was her home, her son's home. And she wasn't about to let anyone push them out. She hadn't told Noah about the note. At 10 years old, he was already too aware of the hardships they faced. She saw it in the way he tried to help around the farm, in the way he didn't complain when dinner was just beans and cornbread again. He had his father's eyes, soft, brown pools filled with both curiosity and sadness. Olivia's heart clenched every time she looked at him, remembering what they had lost. It had been 3 years since Marcus died. He had been her anchor, the one who had helped her transition from war to civilian life. His sudden passing left a void she couldn't fill, and some days the weight of grief was almost unbearable. But she had Noah, and for him she would endure anything. Tonight, though, that old soldier's instinct was screaming in her ears. The animals were restless in the barn, shifting and huffing in the dark. The air felt charged, thick with something, unseen but undeniably present. Olivia tightened her grip on the rifle and took a slow step forward, her boots silent against the wooden porch. She had spent years moving in the shadows, trained to notice the smallest details. And right now every fiber of her being was telling her she was not alone. A soft rustling came from the tree line near the west field. Not the wind, not an animal. Something, someone, was out there. Olivia exhaled slowly, steadying her breath the way she had 1,000 times before taking a shot. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. If they thought she was just a helpless woman living on borrowed time, they were about to learn the truth the hard way. She took one more step forward. Then, in the darkness, a shadow moved. And Olivia Carter raised her rifle. The night stretched long and quiet, but Olivia knew better than to trust silence. She kept her rifle steady, her breath measured, eyes locked on the tree line. The shadow had moved, but it hadn't emerged. Whoever, or whatever, was out there was waiting, watching. The wind picked up, rustling the tall grass around her. Cold dread curled in her stomach, but Olivia refused to let it root itself in her mind. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not now, not ever. Her grip tightened on the rifle, fingers pressing into the worn stock. Patience, precision, control. The 3 words echoed in her mind, a lesson drilled into her during sniper training. She had spent years in the field, her hands steady even when bullets zipped past her head. This was different, though. This wasn't a battlefield overseas. This was her home. After a long moment, the rustling stopped. Olivia didn't move. She kept her stance firm, her body a coiled spring ready to strike. Minutes passed, and then, just as suddenly as the presence had arrived, it was gone. The wind carried no more sounds of movement. Only the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl filled the space where tension had once sat heavy. Olivia exhaled, slow and controlled. Whoever was watching her had decided not to make a move yet. She lowered the rifle slightly but didn't sling it over her shoulder. With one last sweeping glance across the property, she stepped back inside, bolting the door behind her. She needed to prepare. The next morning, Olivia sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee from an old tin cup. Across from her, Noah worked, on a math worksheet, his small brows furrowed in concentration. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the room, but the feeling from last night still lingered in her bones. "Mom?" Noah's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Can we go into town today? I finished all my chores." Olivia studied him, debating. The town wasn't far, only a 15-minute drive. But lately, every visit felt like stepping onto a stage, where she was the subject of whispered conversations. And after last night, she wasn't sure she wanted to leave the farm unguarded, but Noah didn't know about the note, or the feeling of being watched. She couldn't let him live in fear. "Yeah, Bud," she said, ruffling his dark curls. "Go get your boots on." The town of Ash Hollow wasn't much. A handful of shops lined Main Street, most with faded signs and dust-covered windows. There was a diner, a gas station, and a general store, the kind of place where news spread faster than wildfire. Olivia parked the truck outside Millie's Market, pulling her baseball cap lower as she stepped out. Noah ran ahead, eager to grab a candy bar with the little money he had saved from helping around the farm. The bell above the door jingled as Olivia entered. The store smelled of coffee and aged wood, shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to tools. A few locals milled about, their eyes flicking toward her the moment she stepped inside. She felt their stares, heard the hushed murmurs. She's still holding on to that land. Has no idea what's coming. Should have left when she had the chance. Olivia ignored them, grabbing a bag of flour and some canned beans. The old Olivia, the soldier, would have confronted them. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She had learned the hard way that some battles weren't worth fighting. Still, something was wrong. The town had always been tight-knit, but lately there was a shift in the air. A quiet hostility. She stepped toward the counter, placing her items down. "Morning, Millie," she said, forcing a small smile. Millie Dawson was in her 60s, her gray hair pinned up in a neat bun. She had known Olivia's parents and had always been kind until recently. Millie gave her a long look before ringing up the items. "You should be careful, Olivia." Her voice was low, almost hesitant. Olivia stilled. "Careful about what?" Millie's eyes darted toward the two. Men near the entrance, Burke and Tanner Hastings, brothers, ranchers, and troublemakers. They had been eyeing Olivia since she walked in, their conversation stopping the moment she entered. Millie leaned in slightly, voice barely above a whisper. "There are people in this town who don't like that you're still here." Olivia already knew that, but before she could respond, Millie straightened, her expression closing off. "That'll be 1850. The warning was over. The conversation was done. Olivia paid, grabbed her bag, and turned toward the door, catching Burke Hastings' smirk as she passed. Noah was already outside, waiting by the truck with a candy bar in hand. His smile was bright and carefree, oblivious to the tension his mother carried. She wouldn't let the darkness touch him. Not now. Not ever. But as she opened the truck door, a single thought lodged itself deep in her mind. They don't like that. I'm still here, because they're planning to change that. That night, Olivia sat on the porch, a knife in one hand, sharpening it with slow, methodical strokes. The rhythmic scrape of steel on stone filled the air. The farm was quiet, save for the distant hoot of an owl. She had been in enough war zones to know when something was coming. The signs were all there, the whispers, the warnings, the feeling of being watched. And she wasn't going to wait for them to make the first move. She had spent too many years following orders, too many nights staring through the scope of a rifle, deciding who lived and who died. She never wanted that life again. She had sworn it off when Noah was born. But there was one lesson she had never forgotten: strike first, or be hunted. And Olivia Carter was no one's prey. Inside the barn, a figure moved in the shadows. Boots scraped against dirt. A hand reached for the latch. And then, a click echoed through the still night. The sound of a gun being cocked. And Olivia's voice cold as steel. The figure froze. The barn was dimly lit, the only light filtering in through cracks in the wooden walls, casting jagged shadows across the dirt floor. Olivia stood just outside the doorway, rifle raised, her silhouette cutting a sharp outline against the night. 5 seconds, she repeated, her voice low and unwavering. The intruder hesitated, then slowly raised their hands. The shape of him became clearer as he stepped into a sliver of moonlight. Burke Hastings. Olivia's jaw tightened. She should have known. Burke had the kind of face that always looked smug, like he thought he owned everything he laid eyes on. A rancher by trade, but more of a bully by reputation. His family had money, land, and influence, none of which they had ever used kindly. "I ain't here to cause trouble," Burke said, his voice thick with false sincerity. "Just wanted to have a little chat." Olivia didn't lower the rifle. Most people knock on the front door when they want to chat. Burke chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Didn't figure you'd invite me in." He took a slow step forward. "You know, Liv, folks around here are real concerned about you. This farm, I don't care what people are concerned about," Olivia cut in. "And you don't get to call me Liv." Burke exhaled through his nose, his expression darkening. "All right, Olivia," he said, spitting her name out like a curse. "I'll be plain with you. You've had your time here. But this land, it don't belong to you. Not really." Her grip on the rifle tightened. "It belonged to my parents, and now it belongs to me." Burke smirked. "That's what the papers say. But you and I both know this land's bigger than just a name on a deed. It's opportunity. And people with the right kind of power, they don't like obstacles standing in their way." "Then tell them to go around," Olivia shot back. Burke took another step forward, just enough for her to smell the sweat and whiskey on him. "You got a kid, don't you?" The air between them thickened. The rifle didn't move, but Olivia's pulse roared in her ears. That sounded like a threat. Burke raised his hands in mock innocence. "Just saying, kids need stability. And a single mother running a failing farm ain't exactly the safest way to raise a boy." Olivia's mind flashed. Noah laughing as he helped her feed the chickens, his small hands gripping a hammer as he helped fix the fence, the way his face lit up when
Burke's
she told him
words were
stories
designed to
about his
shake her.
father, to make her feel alone, vulnerable. But Olivia had survived far worse than men like him. She took a slow step forward, lowering the barrel of her rifle just enough to press it against Burke's chest. "I think we're done here," Burke's smirk faltered. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. For the first time, the confidence in his stance wavered. He forced a chuckle and took a step back. "Suit yourself," he muttered. Then his eyes flicked up to meet hers, something dark and dangerous gleaming beneath his forced smile. "But don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he turned and walked out of the barn, disappearing into the night. Olivia stood there, rifle still in hand, the weight of his words pressing against her like a loaded gun. She had seen men like him before, entitled, arrogant, used to getting their way. But this wasn't just about land. This was war, and Olivia Carter never lost a war. The next morning, Olivia sat at the kitchen table, staring at an old photograph. It was worn from years of handling, edges curled, the image slightly faded. Marcus stood beside her, his arm around her waist, both of them in uniform. His grin was easy, his eyes full of life. She could still hear his voice. "You don't have to be the strongest, Liv. You just have to be the one who refuses to fall." She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. Burke's words had rattled her, but she wouldn't let them break her. Still, she needed a plan. She knew the way men like Burke operated. If intimidation didn't work, they'd escalate, cut off her supplies, damage her property, maybe worse. She needed to stay ahead of them, and that meant she needed someone who could give her more information. Someone in town knew exactly what was going on. She just had to find them. The town's only bar, the Rusted Nail, was a dimly lit, smoky dive where locals gathered to drink and swap gossip. It was the kind of place where secrets were traded over cheap whiskey and where loyalty could be bought if the price was right. Olivia hadn't set foot inside in years. Not since Marcus had taken her here for a dance on the night before his last deployment. The memories clawed at her, but she pushed them down. Tonight wasn't about the past. It was about survival. She stepped inside, eyes adjusting to the dim light. The scent of stale beer and fried food clung to the air. A few heads turned, conversations quieting just enough for her to notice. At the far end of the bar, a man sat nursing a glass of bourbon. Wyatt Grayson, a former ranch hand who had worked for Burke Hastings before things had gone south. He knew things Olivia needed to know. She walked over, sliding onto the stool beside him. "Didn't take you for a bourbon man," she said. Wyatt smirked without looking at her. "Didn't take you for someone who drinks with dead men." She raised an eyebrow. "Dead men?" Wyatt took a slow sip. "That's what you are if you don't get the hell out of Dodge." Olivia studied him. He was scruffy, his beard uneven, his clothes worn like he'd been living rough, but his eyes were sharp. "You worked for Burke," she said. "You know what he's planning." Wyatt let out a humorless chuckle. "I did work for him, right, up until I figured out what kind of man he really was. And?" Wyatt finally turned to face her. "And I left because Hastings isn't just some rich rancher who wants more land. He's got backing, people outside this town with deep pockets, and a whole lot of interest in making sure you don't cause problems." Olivia's stomach tightened. This was bigger than she thought. "They want my land." "Why?" Wyatt exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Because of what's under it." She frowned. "Under it?" Wyatt lowered his voice. "Oil." Olivia's pulse quickened. She had always known her land had value, but oil, that changed everything. That meant Burke and whoever was behind him wouldn't just walk away if she refused to sell. They would keep coming. Wyatt leaned closer. "Listen, I ain't got much left, but I know this. Burke's just the tip of the spear. There are people in suits who don't show their faces, but they're pulling the strings. And if they want you gone?" He shook his head. "They won't stop until you are." Olivia's fingers curled into fists. She had fought battles before, had faced enemies who wanted her dead. But this was personal. Her land, her son, her home. If they thought she would roll over and hand it to them, they had no idea who they were dealing with. She met Wyatt's gaze, steel in her voice. "Then they're about to find out what happens when they push the wrong person." Wyatt exhaled. "Hell, lady, I hope you got bullets." Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. "I've got plenty." And this time, she wasn't just waiting for them to make a move. She was striking first. The air was thick with tension. Olivia crouched low behind the wooden beams of the barn, her breath controlled, her rifle steady in her hands. The moonlight spilled across the yard in fractured slivers, illuminating the shifting shadows near the fence line. She wasn't alone. They were here. It had started subtly, footsteps crunching in the distance, the faint rustling of dry grass, movements that didn't belong to the night's usual rhythm. Then she saw it, a flicker of motion near the gate, a figure slipping into the darkness. Burke was getting bolder. She had spent the past few days reinforcing the house, setting up makeshift barricades, and preparing for exactly this moment. But preparation only went so far. Now it was happening. The faint sound of metal scraping against wood sent a spike of adrenaline through her veins. Someone was tampering with the lock on her shed, the same shed that stored fuel, tools, and the spare generator. They weren't just here to intimidate her. They were here to dismantle her ability to fight back. Olivia exhaled slowly, adjusting her grip on the rifle. She could wait, or she could send a message. Her finger hovered over the trigger. A warning shot could spook them. But spooking men like Burke's crew could also send them into a frenzy. She needed them afraid but not desperate. Instead, she reached for the flare gun she had strapped to her side. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she aimed toward the night sky and fired. The flare hissed upward, cutting through the darkness like a blade of fire. The entire yard was bathed in an eerie red glow. Shouts erupted from the shadows. "Shit! Move!" A figure bolted from the shed, scrambling toward the fence. Another crouched low, shielding their face from the sudden brightness. Olivia didn't hesitate. She stepped out from the barn, rifle aimed. Next one's not a warning. One of the intruders, a wiry man with a thick beard, froze mid-step. His eyes darted toward the house, then back to Olivia. Then Burke's voice cut through the night. "Fall back." They hesitated only a second before obeying. Two figures vaulted over the fence, disappearing into the tree line. A third stumbled, nearly losing his footing before catching up with the others. Burke lingered just a moment longer, standing at the edge of the property just beyond the flare's glow. Then he smirked. Olivia's grip tightened. Burke raised a hand, tipping an imaginary hat. "See you real soon." Then he was gone. The next morning, Olivia surveyed the damage. They had cut the fuel line to her generator, slashed a few tires on her truck, and left the remnants of a Molotov cocktail near her back porch, unlit but unmistakable. A threat. She clenched her jaw. They wanted her to know this was only the beginning. Noah watched her from the porch, his small frame tense. He was smart. He knew something was wrong, even if she had tried to shield him from it. "Are they coming back?" he asked quietly. She turned to him, forcing a reassuring smile. "They might try," she admitted, "but they don't scare me." Noah studied her, his young eyes filled with something deeper than just fear. A question he wasn't sure how to ask. "Mom." He hesitated. "Why do they want our farm so bad?" She exhaled, crouching to his level. "Because it's worth more than I ever realized. But it's our home." His voice was small but determined. Her heart clenched. She brushed his hair back. "That's why we're going to fight for it." The sun was just starting to set. When Olivia made her way into town, she needed answers. And if there was one person who could give them to her, it was Wyatt. The Rusted Nail was busier than before, filled with ranch hands and locals unwinding from the day's work. She spotted Wyatt in the back corner nursing a bottle of whiskey. She slid into the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "Hell, I thought that flare last night did all the talking for you." She leaned forward. "I need to know exactly how deep this goes." Wyatt sighed, rubbing his jaw. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "It's bigger than Burke. Way bigger." Olivia already knew that much. "They're not just trying to intimidate you. They're trying to make it impossible for you to stay. Because once you're gone, the land's up for grabs." "And the company backing Burke?" He shook his head. "They don't play fair." Her stomach tightened. "Who are they?" Wyatt hesitated. "Wyatt," she pressed. He sighed. "Granite Corp." Olivia's blood ran cold. She had heard the name before. A corporate giant with a reputation for ruthless land acquisitions. Always just inside the lines of legality, but never clean. And now they wanted her farm. "Burke's just the muscle," Wyatt continued. "Granite's the one pulling the strings. And if you think Burke's bad..." He shook his head. "Granite doesn't leave loose ends." The weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. She had been preparing for a fight. But this was a war. Wyatt glanced toward the door, then back at her. "You need to leave." "No." He gave her a sharp look. "Damn it, Olivia, this ain't a pride thing. This is survival. These people don't stop until they get what they want." She met his gaze, unwavering. "Then they're about to learn what happens when they push the wrong woman." Wyatt studied. Her for a long moment, then exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Jesus, you're serious. Dead serious. He muttered a curse. Then, after a pause, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. This came across my desk before I left Burke's crew. He slid it toward her. She unfolded it carefully. The words on the document hit her like a sledgehammer. Granite. Corp. Eviction order in process. Her heart pounded. The company had already filed to seize her land. It was happening now. She clenched her fists. They thought they could just take it? That they could push her out with threats and legal maneuvering? Not a chance. She looked up at Wyatt, fire in her eyes. What else do you know? Wyatt hesitated, then leaned in. There's one more thing. His voice was barely above a whisper. Burke's got a meeting with their rep. Tonight. Midnight. Out at the old sawmill. A cold determination settled over her. This was it. If Burke was meeting with Granite's people, that meant she had one chance to hear their plan, to catch them off guard. A plan was already forming in her mind. She had the skills, the training, and now she had a target. She stood, sliding the document into her pocket. Wyatt looked at her warily. Olivia, what are you going to do? She met his gaze, expression hard as stone. I'm going to end this. Then she turned and walked out, the weight of war settling on her shoulders. Tonight, the fight came to them. Cliffhanger ending. The sawmill loomed in the distance, abandoned for years, now repurposed as a meeting ground for men who thought they were untouchable. Olivia crouched low, hidden among the trees, watching as Burke pulled up in his truck. Another vehicle followed. A sleek, black SUV. Granite's rep. The doors opened. And as Olivia caught a glimpse of the man stepping out, her blood ran ice cold. She knew that face, and he knew hers. Her breath caught. This wasn't just business. This was personal. The sawmill loomed before Olivia, its skeletal remains barely standing against the wind that whistled through broken slats. She crouched low in the tall grass, her breathing measured, every sense on high alert. Burke's truck sat idling, its headlights casting long shadows against the dirt. The black SUV beside it screamed corporate money, sleek, polished, out of place in a dying town like this. Then, the door opened. A man stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket, his movements calm, practiced. His face caught the moonlight, and Olivia's blood turned to ice. No, she knew him, Ethan Calloway, her former commanding officer, a man she once trusted with her life. For a moment the world narrowed to a pinpoint, her mind roaring with memories. The Green Berets, the missions, the unshakable bond of soldiers. But Ethan had disappeared years ago, leaving behind whispers of corruption, of betrayals buried deep within classified files. And now he was standing on her land working with the men trying to take it. Her grip tightened on her rifle. This wasn't just about oil. It wasn't just about greed, this was personal. You sure you can handle this? Burke's voice snapped Olivia back into the present. Ethan chuckled, taking a slow step forward. You think too small, Hastings. The land isn't the prize. It's what's under it. And I don't intend to play games with some ex-soldier in her little farm, Burke frowned, shoving his hands into his pockets. Then why the hell are we still waiting around? Ethan turned toward him, and in the faint light, Olivia saw the amusement in his eyes. Because she's watching us right now. The breath hitched in her throat. He knew. The bastard knew she was there. Come on out, Olivia, Ethan called, his voice carrying over the night air. We both know you're not the type to run. Silence. The wind howled through the sawmill, rattling loose metal. Every instinct screamed at Olivia to stay hidden, to retreat, reassess. But this was her fight, and she wouldn't let them dictate the battlefield. She rose from her hiding spot, rifle steady, stepping into the dim glow of the truck's headlights. Burke stiffened. Ethan, however, looked almost pleased. That's more like it, he said, smiling. It's been a long time, Carter. Not long enough, Olivia shot back. Ethan smirked. Still sharp, I see. That's good. She didn't lower the rifle. Tell me why you're really here. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. You always were quick, but fine, I'll humor you. He motioned toward the ground beneath their feet. Your land is a gold mine, Olivia, not just oil, something bigger. Her pulse quickened. What are you talking about? Ethan chuckled. Do you really think Granite Corp is just interested in some local drilling operation? Your land is sitting on top of an underground military facility, one the government buried decades ago. Old tech, old secrets, and they want it back. Olivia felt the world shift under her feet. She had lived on this land her whole life. Her parents had farmed it, it was theirs. And now Ethan was telling her it had never belonged to them at all? You're lying, she said, but even she could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. Ethan's smirk deepened. Am I? Burke, however, looked pissed. You told me this was about oil, he snapped, stepping toward Ethan. Ethan barely spared him a glance. And I told you what you needed to hear. Burke clenched his fists. You son of a... Bang! The gunshot split. The night. And Burke collapsed to his knees, a hole in his chest. Olivia's breath caught as she watched the blood spread across his shirt. Ethan exhaled, lowering his pistol. He was always going to be a liability. Burke gurgled, his body convulsing. Then he went still. Olivia's grip on her rifle tightened until her knuckles went white. You always were a snake, she said, voice deadly calm. Ethan sighed. Come now, Olivia. You know how the world works. The strong survive. The weak get buried. You think I'm weak? His eyes glinted. I think you're predictable. Olivia barely had time to move before she heard the crunch of footsteps behind her. A second later, something slammed into her back. Pain exploded through her ribs as she hit the ground hard, her rifle knocked from her hands. A boot pressed against, her spine pinning her down. Ethan crouched beside her, his voice calm, almost disappointed. I gave you a chance to walk away. Olivia gritted her teeth. Then she saw it, her rifle just inches from her fingers. Ethan sighed. I really hate making messes. He raised his gun, and Olivia moved. With a sharp twist, she rolled, snatching the rifle in one fluid motion. Ethan's eyes widened. Too late. Bang. The shot tore through his shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. Olivia scrambled to her feet, ignoring the searing pain in her side. She leveled the rifle at Ethan, breath heaving. His expression had changed. The smugness was gone. Now, there was something else. Uncertainty. Blood dripped from his shoulder as he held up a hand. You don't want to do this, Carter. Give me one. Reason why I shouldn't. Ethan exhaled, pressing a hand to his wound. Because I'm the only one who can call them off. Her fingers flexed against the trigger. Granite's coming, Ethan continued, his voice strained. You shoot me and they'll send more. They'll burn your farm to the ground, your kid, you won't stand a chance. Her breath hitched. Noah. She couldn't let this war reach him. Ethan must have seen the hesitation in her eyes because he smiled despite the pain. You don't have to win, Olivia, you just have to leave. For the first time, doubt crept in. Could she really stop this? Then she thought of Marcus, of his words. You don't have to be the strongest. You just have to be the one who refuses to fall. She knew what she had to do. Olivia lowered her rifle, just enough to make Ethan believe she was giving in. Relief flickered across his face. Good girl. Then she moved. With lightning speed, she grabbed the flare gun from her belt and fired. The flare shot straight into the SUV's gas tank. Ethan barely had time to react before the vehicle exploded. Flames erupted into the sky, the force of the blast knocking him off his feet. Olivia staggered back, shielding her face from the heat. Ethan coughed, trying to push himself up. His eyes met hers, wide with disbelief. You just made a mistake, he rasped. Olivia stepped toward him, gun still in hand. No, you did. Then she raised the rifle and brought it down hard against his head. Ethan crumpled. The flames roared behind her, casting her shadow long against the dirt. Granite Corp would come, She knew that. But they wouldn't find a scared woman waiting for them. They'd find a warrior, and Olivia Carter was just getting started. Cliffhanger, transition to resolution. The fire crackled, smoke curling into the night sky. Olivia turned, walking away from the wreckage. This wasn't over. But the next time they came for her, she'd be ready. The fire had long since died down, leaving behind the charred skeleton of the SUV and the smoldering remains of the old sawmill. The acrid scent of burning metal still clung to the air, mixing with the damp earth beneath Olivia's boots. The battle was over, for now. She stood at the edge of her property, rifle slung across her back, watching as the first light of dawn bled across the sky. The golden hues stretched over the rolling hills, painting her land in a warmth she hadn't felt in years, her land still hers. The relief settled deep in her bones, but it was a cautious one. She knew this wasn't the end. Granite Corp wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. They'd regroup. They'd come back. But next time, she'd be waiting. Ethan had survived. Barely. By the time Olivia had checked him, he was unconscious, blood pooling from the wound in his shoulder and a deep gash on his head from where she had struck him. She had been tempted to leave him there, let the elements or the scavengers finish what she started. But she wasn't like him. She had called Sheriff Tucker instead. Now, 2 days later, she stood outside the county jail, watching as they transferred Ethan into a blacked-out government vehicle. His hands were cuffed, his face bruised, but his smirk was still there. "You think you've won?" he rasped, as 2 federal agents shoved him into the car. "Granite doesn't lose, Carter. You just slowed them down." Olivia met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "That's the difference between us, Calloway. You're playing a game, I'm fighting for my home." Ethan scoffed, but there was something in his eyes, something that looked like doubt, like fear. The door slammed shut, and the vehicle rolled away, disappearing into the morning fog. "Sheriff," Tucker sighed, pulling his hat lower on his head. "You made a hell of a mess, Carter." She smirked. "Clean mess. You got a corrupt ex-military officer, a dead oil boss, and enough evidence to keep Granite tangled in legal battles for years." Tucker huffed a laugh. "You always were a pain in the ass." She shrugged. "Gotta stay sharp." As she turned to leave, Tucker called after her. "You know this isn't over, right? You stirred up a hornet's nest." Olivia stopped, glancing. "Huck. Yeah, but last I checked, hornets burn just like everything else." The days that followed were filled with quiet victories. Burke's death had sent the rest of his men scattering. Without his intimidation tactics, the pressure on the townsfolk eased. Granite Corp, now caught in a federal investigation thanks to the evidence Olivia had collected, had put their drilling operations on hold. For now, the town could breathe again. But it wasn't just the town that needed to heal. One afternoon, Olivia found herself sitting on the porch. Her rifle leaned against the railing, watching Noah chase a stray dog through the fields. His laughter carried on the breeze, light and unburdened. It was the first time in a long time she had seen him smile like that. She thought of Marcus, of the life they had wanted to build together, of the promise she had made him, to keep going, no matter what. For so long she had let grief weigh her down, let the past hold her prisoner. But now, as she watched her son running through the tall grass, she felt something stir inside her. Hope. It wasn't over. There were still battles ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Olivia Carter felt like she had won something, and she wasn't going to lose it again. 1 week later, Olivia walked into town, her presence no longer met with wary stares or hushed whispers. People nodded in respect, some even offering small smiles. The air felt different, lighter. At the diner, Mrs. Hill set a fresh plate of biscuits in front of her, shaking her head with a smirk. "Didn't think I'd see the day you became the town's hero, Carter," Olivia chuckled, breaking apart a biscuit. "Don't go getting sentimental on me." Mrs. Hill winked. Too late. As Olivia ate, she felt a presence beside her. She turned to see a familiar face, Luke, the young mechanic who had once been too scared to even meet her eyes. I just wanted to say thanks," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. For what you did. For all of us. Olivia nodded. It's our town, Luke. We fight for it together. A small smile tugged at his lips. Yeah. I think we finally get that now. As he walked away, Olivia glanced out the diner window toward the horizon. The fight wasn't over, but the town was stronger now. And so was she. She took a deep breath, the scent of fresh coffee and warm biscuits filling the air, for the first time in a long time. She felt at home. That night, Olivia stood on her porch, the stars stretched wide above her. The crickets chirped, the wind whispered through the trees. Then, in the distance, a pair of headlights flickered on the main road. A black car. Her grip tightened on the railing. They were watching. She exhaled slowly, then turned, walking inside. They could watch all they wanted, because if they came for her again, she'd be ready.